Okay, so with our hand sewing project, the first thing you need to do is to finish the sample practice stitches, and you should all have a piece of felt that looks like this. Middle school, some of you finished, and so you're ready to progress on to the next thing. But those of you that did not finish, make sure you've completed the 4 things from this piece of felt. So on the X's, you should have buttons, 3 buttons sewed on each. If you're just beginning, you're absent, or high school, you're just starting, then just a couple things to be mindful of. Your fabric has a front and a back. Obviously, all of the knots in your beginning of your sewing, you should start on the back side. And so if you're holding it up, you'll start on the back. Where's the camera? You'll start on the back side with your needle knotted going through to the front. A stitch is, in case someone doesn't know, it's when you bring your needle through and then go over. This would be a very large stitch to go back to the back side. So that would be one complete stitch. Obviously, you don't want your stitches to be that big. If you're sewing a button, it wouldn't be that big, but I'll just pull that out. Okay, so be sure that you always start on the back and go to the front. For buttons, you have 2 types of buttons. You have buttons that have 2 buttonholes and buttons that have 4 buttonholes. If you are sewing a 2 buttonhole, you basically only have one option: to go through one buttonhole and pull your thread all the way through and then come back down through the other side. The trick with buttonholes is be sure that you hold the button on the X and then come up through the buttonhole. Pull your thread all the way through until it stops, because you should have a knot in it, just gently. And then go over on the other side and pull all the way through until it stops. And then you're going to repeat that same stitch 4 or 5 times, so that will hold your button securely. If you have a 4 button hole, then you will choose to do a parallel stitch like that, or you can do X's between your 4 buttonholes. Each stitch for the button needs to be secured, that needs to be sewn 4 or 5 times. So if you're doing a 4 hole and you're doing an X, so you would make 1 stitch like an X, you go and repeat that 4 times before you move to the other part of the X, if that makes any sense. If this is confusing to you, I'll put on YouTube how to sew a button. The other thing is you want to make sure that you go up through the button, and then down through the buttonhole. Do not go around the fabric to the back and leave a loop on your fabric like that. If you loop the fabric from the front to the back, that means you messed up and you have to start again. And so just be careful. You should only see a stitch on the button going from the front to the back. Are you confused yet? Hopefully not. It's really not that hard. Once you have made multiple stitches on your button, then tie it off on the back side and cut the thread and then start again. If you're stitching and you run out of thread, tie it off on the back. Leave a little bit of thread so that you can tie it off, and then cut the thread, rethread, and tie a knot in it. So when you thread your needle, just in case you didn't catch that, you will put the needle through the thread. You'll bring both strings together where they're even at the bottom. Then you'll take those 2 together and pull them tight. Like the needle would be dangling at the bottom, and then your ends would be here, and then you just make a loop, and you'd make a loop with the thread and then pull the end through the loop like that, and then you take the end and go through the loop and then pull tight. Then it knots it. You might want to do it twice so that your looped thread will not pull through. And you just aim for the exact same spot, and then it makes a nice knot like that. All right, so 3 buttons, start with that. Then your next line of stitching is going to be the straight stitch. Are you dizzy yet? The straight stitch just looks like a dotted line, and so one of the videos shows you it can be called a running stitch or a straight stitch. You just bring your needle, start on the back side, and then go all the way through and then go down. Just make a little stitch, skip space, and so that your stitch will look like a dotted line, just like that. If you run out of thread, again, just tie it off on the back side. Your back will not look very pretty. You will have multiple knots and string, and that's perfectly fine. It's the front that you want to look nice, like that. With this side. Okay, so you sew on 3 buttons, do a running stitch or a straight stitch, and then the second line over here is going to be the back stitch. When you are finished with the back stitch, it will look like a solid line of stitching, and so it's similar to the straight stitch, but instead of going forward and skipping the space, you come up in front of the stitch and then you go back into the stitch to complete the line of stitching. I'll include a video that maybe makes it a little bit more seen. Then at the very bottom you have one more line, and this is to be your hem stitch. You're going to fold the fabric up to meet the line, and then you're going to stitch it down. There are multiple ways to do a hem stitch. I've seen several on the web, and so you can look at the video that I will put for you, or you can try to figure it out yourself. If I can work to show you, I will try to do that. It's like you're making a big loop with your fabric, and so on your third line you're going to take the bottom of the, you can't find the camera, the bottom of the fabric and fold it up to meet that line, as if you were folding up your pants. They're too long and you need to hem them, and so the fabric is folded up to the top. You're going to start on the inside of that fold with your thread going through that, because your knot won't be seen. And then you're going to bring your thread around to the left and hold it down with your finger. Needle goes to the right, where you catch a little bit of that fabric into the fold of the hem on top of the thread, and pull through. If your needle does not go on top of the thread, you have a slanted line. I think it looks better to for the needle to go on top, and then you have a little catch so it slips. So the thread goes around to the left, the needle goes to the right, catch a little bit of the back into the fold of the hem on top of the thread, and then you pull through. And it should catch right there at the top for you. That will secure it so you don't have a big stitch. Do one more. Around to the left and hold it. The needle goes to the right. Or maybe backwards here. The idea is your thread stays down, your needle comes around in a loop and goes on top. Like that, so that it catches and pulls through. When you're sewing, you kind of do need to pull on your thread to make sure you get it all the way through and to make sure that it stays straight. If you get a big wad of it on the back side, then you haven't pulled it securely through. You don't want to pull so hard that you break it, but you just kind of want to keep straightening it and pulling it through. If you run out of thread doing the hem stitch, just knot off, like unfold it, knot off on this side, and then put your needle again, start on the underneath, and then you can complete that. You really need to do all the stitching all the way down on these lines. And so you'll have 3 different. You'll have the straight stitch, the back stitch, and then the last will be the hem stitch. So here's a sample. I did a second stitch over here on this side so that you could see that it's a dotted line, and then it's a solid line of stitching all the way down, and then the hem stitch all the way down. When you've completed that, would you send me a picture of it? I know a few students finished before we left for school on spring break, and so would you just shoot me a picture as well, because I didn't write those down. So that is your first assignment to practice your stitching. If you've completed that, there's some other embroidery stitches that you might want to practice. You can use this piece of felt, or if you have something else, the kind of the chain stitch, which you're making loops, or a French knot. We'll include that video if you have finished and you want to practice that. Tomorrow we will start with constructing the stuffed owls. You'll need to cut out the pattern, then you'll need to cut out the pieces using your pattern with the felt scraps that I've given you, and there'll be some instructions on that as well. So again, I'll include videos in case mine was very confusing as far as the four things that you need to do with this practice, and then send me pictures when you're done. So typically in class, we take 2 days to finish it. If you're just starting, you can finish it right away quickly, or you can take a day or so to do it. So, but tomorrow I will be giving instruction on beginning the next project. See ya!